many members may not come back after. So I don't know if there'll be more members then or than there are now, and I'll give it her the...
Go ahead, Ms. Tomlin. I'm sorry.
We're going to leave the last few minutes of this recorded event to take you to the U.S. Senate. A quick reminder, you can see this hearing and any C-SPAN event anytime online at cspan.org. The Senate today gaveling in to start their week. General speeches are up first until 5 o'clock when lawmakers will turn to a pair of judicial nominations. Votes on those are scheduled for 5:30. We expect more debate after the votes on the immigration policy bill. Now live to the Senate floor, here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order, and the Chaplain, Retired Admiral Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer. Chaplain.
Let us pray. O omnipotent, sovereign God, beneath whose all-seeing eye our mortal lives are passed, may all our deeds and purposes today bring honor to you. Lord, save us from pride and arrogance, and help us to be quick to see the needs of those less fortunate than ourselves, and promote goodwill and fellowship among all people. Today, bless our lawmakers. Let their motives be transparent and their word be their bond. May they be generous in their judgment of others, loyal in their friendships, and magnanimous to their opponents. Sovereign God, let every knee be bent before you and every tongue confess that you are Lord. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. The majority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, following leader remarks, the Senate will be in morning business till 5 p.m. today. At 5, the Senate will be in an executive session to consider a couple of nominations for United States District Judges, one from Pennsylvania and one from New Mexico. At 5:30, there will be at least one roll call vote on confirmation of the nominations. The nominations are Restrepo from New Mexico. I'm sorry, I should know that, but I don't, Mr. President. Restrepo and Gonzales are the two nominations we have. I think Restrepo was from Pennsylvania, Gonzales from New Mexico. And following those votes, the Senate will resume consideration of the immigration bill. Mr. President, it's been 86 days since the Senate passed its budget. Now, we've been through this on several occasions, and we've had Republican senators come and criticize the Republican leadership here for not letting us go to conference. They talked about they're wanting regular order so we could move forward and with the financial crisis that faces this country, but they've ignored us. Mr. President, we're proud of the budget that we passed. It was hard, but it reflects our priorities, protecting middle-class families and a growing economy. Even though that's the case, we're still willing to work out a compromise with our Republican counterparts. You know, we are not going to get everything we want. That's what conference is all about. They've been going on in this country for more than 2 centuries. But we believe that our sound fiscal policy would stand out as being so much better than what they have done in the House, and we could do this the regular order of the budget process. Unfortunately, Democrats and Republicans are not going to find common ground if we never start negotiating. As I said, Mr. President, for 86 days, the Republican leaders have objected to a conference with the House of Representatives. In conference, Democrats and Republicans could work together to work out our differences between our budgets as well as our priorities. But Senate Republicans have objected to conference time and time again. Today I read in the Hill newspaper called Politico, the House Republicans are more than happy for their Senate colleagues to obstruct and delay. They know that a budget conference would only put the spotlight on divisions within the House Republican caucus. Here's what the article said, and I quote, "Going to conference to match the House and Senate passed budgets or making any movement on the budget right now could open up a schism in the Republican caucus on spending that for months leadership has managed to keep mostly at bay." End of quote. So what they're saying is that the Republican leadership over here is protecting the House. The House leadership understands, the Republican leadership, that they can't agree on anything, nothing. And therefore just objecting to this is the right thing to do because they will never get out in the open as to how crazy their budget priorities are, Mr. President. But as Senate Republicans cover for their dysfunctional House colleagues, the country inches closer to another crisis, a default on the nation's bills. Reasonable Republicans are just as concerned as I am about this last manufactured crisis, a crisis that would undercut the economic progress of the last 4 years. Those reasonable Republicans have come to the floor repeatedly to call on Republican leaders to stop blocking bipartisan budget negotiations. I hope those reasonable Republicans prevail. I hope Republican leaders in the House and in the Senate will stop bowing to Tea Party pressures, these extremists, and listen to the more reasonable members of their caucus. I repeat, Republican senators have arrived here on the floor on more than one occasion and criticized our not being able to go to conference. So, Mr. President, if passed as prologue, using the full faith and credit of the United States government as a political hostage will not only be bad for the economy, it will also be bad for the Republican Party. It's time Republican leaders acknowledge that compromise, not reckless brinksmanship, put America on the road to fiscal responsibility. Mr. President, for 16 years, Blanca Gomez thought she was an average American girl. But when she turned 16, one by one, her friends learned to drive. Her parents sat her down and explained an important truth that she didn't know at the time. She couldn't get her driver's license because she is an undocumented immigrant. Her parents brought her to Mexico, to the United States, when she was 7 months old. Because they came without proper paperwork, she was missing something really important. She said, "You need 9 numbers." That refers to her Social Security number that she didn't have. The Social Security number, those 9 numbers, open doors to American citizens that they just take for granted, American citizens. I had an opportunity to visit with Blanca when I was in Las Vegas recently. She's a young woman with everything going for her. She's smart, she's driven, and she loves this country with a passion that's truly moving. In fact, she doesn't remember the country she was born, Mexico. She was 7 months old when she came here. To her, home means Nevada. Mr. President, that is our state song. home means Nevada. And home certainly means Nevada to this young woman. Unfortunately, without a Social Security number, those 9 numbers, Blanca faced challenges her American-born peers simply didn't. But all that changed a year ago this week when President Obama signed a directive suspending deportation of upstanding young people like Blanca who were brought to this country as children. As a result of that, she now has her 9 numbers. Almost 300,000 dreamers, undocumented immigrants, who came to this country as children, have already taken advantage of this opportunity. Thanks to President Obama's courageous action, Blanca and hundreds of thousands of upstanding young men and women like her can rest easy knowing they are no longer in danger of being deported. They can now drive, they can work, and they can get the 9 numbers that unlock a successful future. I repeat, a Social Security number. But Blanca's future and the future of 800,000 young dreamers will remain uncertain until Congress passes common-sense immigration reform. President Obama's directive is only a temporary solution. The Republican majority in the House of Representatives has taken aim at dreamers who voted, and they voted recently to resume deportation of promising young people just like Blanca. And the directive doesn't address the 10 million people living in the country without the proper documentation who don't qualify for deferred action. Many of these individuals are the parents or siblings of dreamers, just like Blanca. The bipartisan legislation before the Senate is the opportunity they've been waiting for. This bill offers a pathway to earn citizenship that begins going to the back of the line, paying penalties and fines, working, paying taxes, staying out of trouble, learning English, getting right with the law. The measure will be good for national security, it will be great for the economy, and it will be good for millions of immigrant families. The bill isn't perfect, but it takes important steps to reform a broken legal immigration system and strengthen border security. I know many of my colleagues have ideas about how to improve this bill. I hope we will be able to process additional amendments soon so that we can give these ideas the debate that deserves here in the Senate. And after that, of course, the votes they deserve. We have 5 amendments pending. We could vote on 4 of them right away. I would also think it would be fair to add the Heller Amendment. That would mean 3 Republican amendments, 2 Democratic amendments. My colleagues should be aware, unless we begin voting on amendments soon, we'll need to work through the weekend in order to finish this bill before July 4th. Recognizing that this is a nation founded by immigrants, I hope senators will consider every amendment to this bill with compassion. Like generations before them, Blanca's parents and millions of other undocumented immigrants came here seeking a better life. The famous author C.S. Lewis said, quote, "You are never too old to dream a new dream." It's time for Congress to help 11 million dreamers, young and old, get right with the law and unlock their potential. The chair would announce the business today, please.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 5 o'clock p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
President, as always, I commend the distinguished majority leader for his words on immigration. We are on this bill because he set this time aside, and he, like I, hope that we will soon be voting on amendments, or a lot of potential amendments, just as we had 300 amendments filed in the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're able to work through them. I don't expect that many here on the floor, but I know the leader has set aside time for us, and I know his commitment to get this filled and fulfilled, and I join them on that. I think the time is right. We either do it now or we're never going to do it. So I thank the leader again. Mr. President, 2 matters I want to talk about, but before I speak about judiciary, I want to speak about the Supreme Court ruled today in Yang versus United States that facts underlying a mandatory minimum sentence must be proved to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. I continue to believe that our criminal justice system's reliance on mandatory minimum sentences is a mistake. In March, Senator Paul and I introduced the Justice Safety Valve Act of 2013. This is to give federal judges greater flexibility in sentencing in cases where a mandatory minimum is not only unnecessary but often counterproductive. Mandatory minimum sentences imprison some people, particularly nonviolent offenders, for far longer than is just or beneficial. Now, looking at it just from a fiscal point of view, as a result, the federal prison population has exploded in recent years. This placed an enormous strain on the Justice Department's budget. That means less money for federal law enforcement, less aid to state and local law enforcement, less funding for crime prevention programs, those things that make us safer, less money for prisoner reentry programs. Sentencing reform has worked at the state level. The Justice Safety Valve Act is an important step toward the sentencing reform that our federal system desperately needs. And I applaud the Supreme Court's decision today in Alien. I have long felt that when legislative bodies pass mandatory minimums, it's a feel-good response to crime, but it does little good. Judges need discretion. Every case that comes before a judge is different. Now, do judges always get it right out of the tens of thousands of cases that come before them? No, of course not. Sometimes they might not. But they're far more often right than wrong, and they're always more right than a legislative one-size-fits-all. And mandatory minimum laws are a one-size-fits-all. Anybody who has spent time in the criminal justice system, either as defense counsel or as prosecutor, or as a judge, knows that one size doesn't fit all. We should get rid of all our mandatory minimums, have real standards judges will follow, and then let the individual men and women who sit on the bench make the decision. Now, on the other issue, as we continue yet another week debating S-744, the bipartisan immigration bill, I really hope we can start making some progress in this final legislation. The American people know that what more of us have to realize, our immigration system is broken. It has to be fixed. If we're going to have an effective solution to this complex problem, we can't focus simply and obsessively on one border or any single aspect of our immigration system. We have to address all parts of our immigration system. Of course, we all agree we have to secure our borders, but we must also reduce the incentives people have to come here illegally or to overstay their visas. That means we have to implement E-Verify so that employers stop hiring those who are not authorized to work here. But we also have to eliminate the extensive backlogs that tear so many families apart. We have to respond to the needs of American farmers and technology companies and investors who create jobs in this country. We also need to remember that our history and our future as a nation is based on immigrants. We are considering the legalization process provided in this bill. Almost 4 weeks ago, the Judiciary Committee voted to report this immigration reform bill with a strong bipartisan vote of 13-5. I understand the Congressional Budget Office is tasked with a difficult one with complex, comprehensive measures such as this one. We had expected their score today. I hope they're able to get us the official score early tomorrow so we can move forward to complete consideration of this bill. But in addition to the CBO score we're waiting, we should also credit the extensive testimony the Judiciary Committee received from former CBO Director Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He testified that immigration reform will increase the productivity growth of the U.S. economy, the fundamental building block of higher standards of living, and generate larger economic growth numbers than we've seen in recent years. Specifically, he estimated the reform of this nature would increase growth so that the overall growth rate in real GDP would rise from 3% to 3.9% on average annually over the first 10 years. So the upshot is GDP after 10 years would be higher, a difference of $64,700 per capita versus $62,900 per capita. This higher per capita income of $1,700 after 10 years is a core benefit of immigration reform. And according to Holtziken, this increase in growth would also help lower our deficit. Also, the Judiciary Committee received powerful testimony from Grover Norquist. He was asked repeatedly by those who opposed this bill whether legalizing immigrants would lead to a drain on our safety net. His response was just the opposite would occur. He testified that immigrants come at the beginning of their working lives, which means they have to have years to pay taxes and contribute to the economy before being eligible for entitlements. Now, it's not every day that I agree with these very conservative commentators and advocates, but I was happy to invite them to testify before the committee and commend their analysis to members who are concerned about the approximated cost of reforming our broken immigration system. All the valid testimony we've received says that fixing the broken immigration system adds to our bottom line in a beneficial way. You know, America protects the most vulnerable among us. This includes survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking, as well as pregnant women and children. And I'm proud to report that there are strong protections in this bill for the treatment of children caught in the broken immigration enforcement system. And in the Judiciary Committee, we added to the bill's protection for domestic violence and human trafficking victims. But the Judiciary Committee also considered and rejected, as it should, several amendments that sought to take away protections in our safety net programs for immigrants who need them. I know that some may want to punish the 11 million undocumented people currently living here in the shadows. The bill specifically contains a steep financial penalty for that purpose. Excuse me. The undocumented also need to go to the back of the line, take classes to learn English. But even these tough steps are not enough for those who oppose this bipartisan bill. Well, some may want to look like they're being even tougher on the undocumented population. We all need to consider how further punitive measures may deter people from coming out of the shadows. When children and pregnant women are put at risk by an urge to punish millions of people who are trying to make a better life for their families, as my grandparents did, we do not live up to our American values, and we do not make this a safer country. Last week, Senator Hatch filed several amendments to deny or delay protections for the millions of people who apply for registered provisional immigrant status. And I'll oppose all of these amendments. They're not fair. They deter people from coming forward to register. That makes us all less safe. It's a cruel irony that when my friends on the other side of the aisle talk about border security, the high cost of implementing what they're proposing is always absent from the discussion. But when we're talking about programs to help children who live near the poverty line, well, then suddenly fiscal concerns are paramount. So if we're talking about a specific type of fencing or some new expensive exit program, our concern is supposed to trump any hesitancy about government spending. Spend whatever it takes. Spend whatever it takes. And at the same time, dramatically increase the boon that such proposals give to the government contracting firms that make money out of them. However, if we're talking about programs that literally feed the hungry or provide vaccinations to children, vaccinations which make us all healthier because of the diseases that it stops, well, then we hear lectures about how we can't afford those programs in the current fiscal environment. Maybe some of these contractors with their lobbyists ought to be covering those programs. Maybe we'll hear more need for them. I would say, from a moral point of view, an indication of how great a country we ought to be saying hungry children, children who can be saved from childhood illnesses, is in our moral core as a nation, the most wealthy, powerful nation on earth, to help them. The bill we are considering prohibits immigrants in registered provisional status from accessing federal means-tested public benefit programs throughout their time in provisional status. In addition, as a result of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act 1996, even qualified legal permanent resident immigrants must wait an additional 5 years after they're legalized to receive any safety net protections. I'm saying, Mr. President, we've already put all kinds of barriers up here. So including the 5-year bar, most immigrants who are working their way through the path of legalization will have to wait anywhere from 13 to 15 years before having any access to safety net programs. Given the penalties and the fines that they have to pay, it's wrong to further deny these low-income family protections that some may desperately need. Like some of the harsh amendments that have been filed with respect to the safety net, I've seen similarly harmful amendments on the issue of the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, or the Child Tax Credit, CTC, which are designed to help hardworking families pay their taxes. Now, the Earned Income Tax Credit is available only to families that are working and paying payroll taxes. Not some kind of giveaway. You've got to be working and paying taxes. The EITC is a core part of the tax code. Like any other tax credit that adjusts federal tax liability based on family circumstances, it's never been considered a public benefit. But some amendments have been filed seeking to deny the EITC for all registered immigrants for eternity, even after they obtain legal status. And one of these amendments was offered during the committee process. We rejected it. I will strongly oppose any amendment to deny hardworking families from participating in these tax credits when they're paying payroll taxes. You know, we give huge tax benefits and loopholes to billionaires. You got a hard-working family. Shouldn't they be entitled to these tiny benefits that are dwarfed by what we give to millionaires? Let's start paying attention to the people who really need our help. Some who oppose comprehensive immigration reform have raised a false alarm. This immigration bill would drain our Social Security trust fund and bankrupt our Medicare system. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the opposite is what's true. In an editorial dated June 2nd, 2013, entitled A $4.6 trillion Opportunity, the Wall Street Journal states unequivocally that immigration reform will improve Social Security's finances. Not take away from it, but will improve it. Said that immigrants unquestionably narrow the funding gap. More generous immigration is a wise step towards solving the entitlement crisis in Washington. I'd ask that consent, Mr. President, that editorial from the Wall Street Journal be put in the record.
Without objection.
I thank the chair. The goal of this bill is to encourage undocumented immigrants to come out of the shadows so we can bring them into our legal system and then do what all, certainly Vermonters tell me, Americans everywhere tell me, that we all play by the same rules. I mean, that's a sense of fairness we should agree to. If we create a reason for people not to come out and register, then it's going to defeat the purpose of this whole bill. It makes all this work, 24 hearings, the hours and days, weeks of markups and consideration, it makes it for naught. Amendments that seek to further penalize the undocumented we just encourage them to stay in the shadows. These steps aren't going to make us safer, and they're not going to spur our economy. One of the many reasons we need immigration reform is to ensure that there is not a permanent underclass in this nation. As part of this effort, we need to continue the vital safety net programs that protect children and pregnant women, other vulnerable populations. Too often immigrants have been unfairly blamed and demonized as a drain on our resources. The facts prove the opposite. We're a nation of immigrants. As I've said many times before, my maternal grandparents came from Italy to Vermont seeking a better life and created a whole lot of jobs when they did that. Sent their children to college and saw their grandson become a United States Senator. My wife's parents came from the province of Quebec, speaking French. She was born here. Her family contributed to the economy of Vermont and our whole region and the jobs they've created, and raised 3 wonderful children at the same time. We're a nation of immigrants. Let's fight to maintain our tradition of protecting the vulnerable. Let's allow the American dream to be a reality for all those who are in this country because they want to be in this country. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I'd suggest the absence of quorum. Before I do that, Mr. President, time is not now divided from one side to the other, is it?
It is not.
Mr. President, and I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. The Senate with general speeches today until 5 p.m. when they'll work on 2 judicial nominations, and then those votes will be at 5:30. Those votes, after the votes, they'll be followed by more debate on the immigration bill. While the Senate remains in this quorum call, we're going to show you a piece of this morning's Washington Journal. Ian Swanson of The Hill and Rebecca Cinderbrand of Politico talk about the week ahead in Washington.
And this morning, we'll kick off our reporter roundtable with a discussion of the week ahead on Capitol Hill, and we're joined by Rebecca Cinderbrand, who's Deputy White House Editor for Politico, and Ian Swanson, news editor for The Hill newspaper here on Capitol Hill. And we'll be taking your questions and comments during the course of the next hour here on this roundtable. But let's start with the push for immigration reform. And Ian Swanson, where's the Senate today after a full week of debate on this issue last week?
Well, the Senate's entering a home stretch. They'll have 2 weeks in which to debate the immigration bill, to go through a bunch of amendments, and to meet Harry Reid's goal of getting the bill out of the Senate before the July 4th recess. So we're expecting a really busy week on Capitol Hill. Lots of meetings off the Senate floor of Republicans and Democrats trying to get different agreements on separate amendments to add to the bill. And really the question at this point doesn't seem to be whether the bill is going to pass, although you can't say that that's a complete certainty yet. But it seems to be a question of how many votes the bill is going to get, with Democrats really pushing to get as many Republicans on board as they can to put pressure on the House once it goes to the lower chamber.
And here's a story on the front page of today's Washington Times just talking about how big this bill is. At 1,075 pages long, it's not the biggest bill to come through in recent years, the story notes, but the immigration legislation pending in the Senate is challenging the ability of voters to get their brains around the complexity, touching on everything from border security to welfare programs to free trade. The massive bill is dominating legislative action this month on Capitol Hill. One group apparently has weighed the printed bill and said it comes to about 24 pounds. You say that Harry Reid wants to get this done by July 4th. Do we think it's on track to still happen by July 4th?
Well, right now it probably is, but a lot's going to be told by this week and the next week. In fact, there could be a very interesting story in the news today. The Congressional Budget Office is going to be putting out a score of the bill very soon. That could happen as soon as today, and that could tell a lot about whether this bill is going to pass. If it comes out with a very pricey number, that might make some people wary about voting for this bill and could slow its progress a bit.
Are there any estimates on what that number might be at this point?
We'll see the first estimate today from CBO, but there are a lot of things being added to this bill on border security. Some of those things tend to be pretty expensive. There's also other amendments that people want to add that would tighten border security more that could also add costs to the bill. So that's something to really watch in the days ahead, how expensive this bill is and how much more expensive it could get depending on what gets added to it.
And Rebecca Cinderbrand is with Politico, the Deputy White House Editor over there. What has the White House's role been as this bill has been on the floor?
You know, it's interesting. You'd seen for most of this process the president kept silence, spoke out a couple of days ago, which was unusual and a bit unexpected for some advocates. One kind of interesting measure, just to step outside Washington for a moment, of how the politics of this has changed. We have a story today about the move at the state level for driver's licenses for illegal immigrants, and you know that's something that tripped up Hillary Clinton during her first presidential run. It's an issue that caused a lot of problems for her, and now you're seeing both Democrats and Republicans, governors at the state level, taking on this issue and thinking of it as a political winner for them.
Well, this is an issue that was a big topic of discussion on the Sunday shows yesterday. Several members to choose from. We'll show you a bit of Senator Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, talking about this issue.
You know, I would simply say to our colleagues, we are open. If you want greater specificity about what that border plan looks like, we're open to that. But what we cannot have, and what I cannot support, and what I believe the community cannot support at the end of the day, is that we're going to have triggers that can never be achieved in terms of border security as an impediment to the pathway to legalization and citizenship.
And Ian Swanson, talk about Senator Menendez's role in the immigration debate as it's played out.
Sure. Well, he's in the Gang of Eight that helped write the bill that the Senate is considering right now. And what was interesting about what he said yesterday and what some other senators yesterday is, Rebecca mentioned the politics of this. The politics are starting to heat up. And yesterday we started to hear some Democrats like Menendez almost warning Republicans, you better get behind this bill or you're going to pay for it in the elections in 2014 and the elections in 2016. Because let's not forget, a big reason that immigration reform has momentum right now is that Barack Obama won 71% of the Hispanic vote in 2012. So Republicans are under some pressure to move along here. We also heard that from Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday, a Republican from South Carolina, who pretty much warned his party, we've got to get behind this, or we could be the party losing elections going forward in 14 and 16.
And Lindsey Graham, also a member of the Gang of Eight as well, that wrote this.
Yeah, that's right.
And here's a bit of Senator Lindsey Graham on NBC's Meet the Press yesterday.
I'm going to leave you on a positive note. I think we're going to have a political breakthrough. The Congress is going to pass immigration reform. I think we're going to get plus 70 votes. I've never been more optimistic about it, so it would be great if we could pass immigration.
And we're doing our reporter roundtable here this morning, and the phone lines are open if you want to talk immigration or any of the other issues we'll be talking about today. Republicans can call in at 202-585-3881, Democrats 202-585-3880, Independents 202-585-3882. But before we leave the issue of immigration, Ms. Cinderbrand, talk a little bit about Lindsey Graham, his relationship with the White House as they've been working on this immigration issue.
Well, this is definitely an issue where you've seen the White House really let Congress take the lead on this and be right out in front, pull to the back. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is you've heard a lot of Democrats say, look, if the president's out in front, it can only stall the issue. It can only keep Republicans who might otherwise support the bill from coming out and backing it. And of course, one of the interesting things about the political calculation here is you talk about the effects in 2014, talk about the effects in 2016. The 2014 and the 2016 electorates are likely to look very different. The 2014 electorate is likely to be older, whiter, probably more conservative traditionally. In an off-year election, that's what the electorate looks like. And so that may not necessarily show quite the effects that some have been predicting. So the question is how much of an impact it has in 2014.
Ian Swanson, you brought up some of the amendments that might be part of this bill. The Hill Floor Action blog has 6 amendments to watch in the Senate immigration reform fight. You can find this article on thehill.com. One of those amendments is a same-sex couples amendment that's being sponsored by Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy. Can you talk a little bit about this amendment?
Yeah, sure. This was an amendment that Chairman Leahy wanted to offer in the committee, in the Judiciary Committee, when they first considered the Senate bill. He didn't, in part because of pressure from Republicans and Democrats in the Gang of Eight, who said, if you add this bill, if you add this amendment to the bill, it'll kill the immigration bill. We won't get an immigration bill through Congress. He said that he would offer to add it on the floor, but on the floor it's going to be much tougher to get it into the bill because you're going to need 60 votes to break a filibuster to add it to the bill. In committee, it was just a majority vote, so it was a big deal for him to back off and not offer it in committee when he just had to get a majority of the committee members to do it. Now he's going to offer it on the floor, but it's very unlikely to be added. In fact, you can pretty much guarantee, I think it won't. That'll upset some people, but it will actually likely make it easier to get immigration through the Senate and the House and to the President's desk.
Oh, Rebecca Cinderbrand, talk a little bit about the larger background for gay marriage, same-sex couple benefits that is going on as this amendment is being offered on the immigration bill. Some news possibly this week from the Supreme Court on this issue?
That's right. The Supreme Court term is coming to a close at the end of this month, and we still have several days of decisions to come, including today. Today at 10 o'clock, the Supreme Court is going to be revealing some of its latest decisions, and one of them, sometime before the end of this month, possibly today, possibly later this in a few days, is going to be same-sex marriage, both on the Defense of Marriage Act and also Prop 8. And so you have a situation where whether or not this issue is included in the immigration bill itself, it may possibly be somewhat moot by the end of the month, depending on what action the Supreme Court takes. A lot of departments in limbo, a lot of regulations in limbo. So, for instance, when it comes to federal workers and Department of Defense, So you have a situation right now where same-sex marriage in the immigration bill may not be as much of a factor.
And the cases that are actually on the docket, we don't know what they're going to be announcing today, right?
We do not.
But some of the cases that are on the docket on this issue, this from today's Baltimore Sun, is Hollingsworth v. Perry. That's the case on California's Proposition 8. Does California's ballot measure limiting marriage to a man and a woman deny same-sex couples their right to equal protection of the law? This review from the Baltimore Sun. And then the other big case is the United States versus Windsor for married gay couples, is part of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional because it denies tax benefits and other benefits to legally married same-sex couples. Ian Swanson, talk a little bit about how Capitol Hill is sort of preparing for the possible rulings from the Supreme Court.
I think they're waiting on their hands to a certain extent. The same-sex marriage shift on Capitol Hill has been pretty dramatic, more dramatic in the Democratic Party perhaps than the Republican Party. I think we've still had only a couple of senators, Republicans, who have come out in favor of gay marriage, but nearly all, if not all, of the Democratic senators have. The tidal wave of change in public opinion has been seen in Washington, and I don't think that we're going to see as many of the kind of culture battles over same-sex marriage coming out to the degree that they did before, because it's just not seen as much as a political winner, although you will probably see it within the Republican Party, particularly when we get to possibly primary challenges among members, or of course the 2016 battle for the White House on the GOP side.
We're talking with Ian Swanson of the Hill newspaper and Rebecca Cinderbrand of Politico, and we're taking your calls and comments on this. Many subjects we'll be discussing in our reporter roundtable for about the next 45 minutes or so. We'll go to Nancy first from Meadowbridge, West Virginia, on our Republican line. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning.
Your comment or question?
I just wanted to comment on the immigration bill. I hear that, that a lot of Republicans think it's so important to get it passed, but that's not what I know from my friends and my relatives. We feel like it's being rushed through, and we don't like the idea of amnesty, and we're really very suspicious of the immigration bill.
Ian Swanson, can you talk about how Republicans feel? Which Republicans are the key Republicans supporting this, and which are opposed?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of Republicans out there feel the way the caller does, and that's something that you've seen reflected in among the membership on Capitol Hill. You've certainly seen some Republican senators talk about the idea that this is being rushed through. Jeff Sessions of Alabama has probably emerged as being the top opponent of the Senate immigration reform bill, but there are other senators like Chuck Grassley from Iowa who have also been very vocal and who have been working to try to change it. One key amendment and one key member to watch is Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He's in the GOP leadership. He has a bill that would tighten security, or an amendment, I should say, that would tighten security provisions on the border. People wouldn't be able to get citizenship until there's a tighter border. And Democrats are saying that is a poison pill amendment, that it could kill it, but there's certainly people working to try to find some kind of a middle ground that could bring Cornyn on board and could get the bill through with more votes.
The Hill has been watching Cornyn for a few days now. Here's a story from late last week by your Alexander Bolton. Cornyn emerged as key to 70-vote threshold for immigration reform. Talk about the idea of a 70-vote threshold, Ms. Cinderbrand, if you could. How large does this need to pass in the Senate to get it to move over to the House, do you think, and what is the President doing to help that?
We've been hearing that 70-vote number for a while. That's been something that's been a huge priority for supporters of the bill. It's seen as a benchmark that indicates that this bill has the kind of support it needs to make it through the House and all the way to the President's desk. And so for some time, there's been a push to make sure that the bill is free of the sort of, as you say, poison pill amendments, and even amendments that are not poison pills, but that might make the bill a little bit tougher to get through, make it a little bit tougher for members who are on the edge to support it, and to keep it as straight and uncontroversial as possible.
Back to the phones. Joe is from Alexandria, Virginia, on our Democratic line. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, and thank you very much for taking my call. I have a comment, observation, suggestion if I have time. I was at the judiciary hearing in the Senate when they passed the immigration bill. It was very moving, and there were a lot of people very excited about it. I have a completely different situation that's not addressed by the immigration bill, and I want to know if any of the people have some suggestions on how to get that to people's attentions. I married a lovely woman from China who first came to the United States on a J-1 visa, exchange visitor program. She was here for 6 months, and as a result, she has a 2-year homestay requirement, which she hasn't met yet. So we cannot be together, even though we're married, until she goes back to China and completes that. And I'm just baffled, and there's some certain amount of irony when millions of undocumented immigrants are about to be able to be on a path toward being able to stay in the United States, and I'm married to a woman who has to go back to a country, and we're kept apart longer because of...
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor to talk about Doug Bailey. Doug Bailey died last week at age 79. The New York Times reported on Tuesday that Doug Bailey helped define the role of political consultant in the 1960s and 70s, and that he founded the Hotline. He was much more than that to me and to countless of others for whom he was an example of how to live a public life. Now, I'm aware that when offering a eulogy, it is good form to speak more of the deceased than of oneself. But that's hard to do with Doug because he cared so much about everyone he met and everyone he worked with. I first met Doug Bailey in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 1977. I was here for a few months working with Howard Baker, the former senator from Tennessee who had just been elected to be the Republican leader of this body. He asked me to come work for him. I think part of that was to lick my wounds for having lost the governor's race a couple of years earlier in Tennessee. There wasn't much prospect for a political future for me then because the Nashville Tennessean had written there wouldn't be a Republican governor in Tennessee for another 50 years. So I was here in Washington, and I became energized by the Republican senators. It looked to me like Jimmy Carter was already in trouble. And my friend Wyatt Stewart introduced me to Doug Bailey. The reason I thought it was important to meet him was at that time he and his partner, John Deardorff, represented 7 of the 12 Republican governors in the country who were still in office after the Watergate debacle of 1974. Doug came to Nashville, sat down with my wife, Honey, and Tom Ingram and me, and we talked about the idea of another governor's race, this time in 1978. Doug's view was that I had lost, among other things, because I wasn't a very interesting candidate, that I'd campaigned in a blue suit and talked to Republicans and to Rotary clubs. And so the talk was about what would be authentic, what did I really like to do, and I ended up, to make a long story short, walking 1,000 miles across Tennessee over 6 months in a red and black shirt, followed by a group of 4 University of Tennessee band members in a flatbed truck. And every now and then, several times a day, we'd get up on the truck and play in Alexander's washboard band. Doug put all that on television, and I won the election. Now, to some, that would seem like an ultimate political gimmick. But if you'll think about it, the idea of the walk across Tennessee was a good deal more authentic than the photo ops and the press releases and the 5-second sound bites that often are what we end up with in politics today. But let me just say it this way. I'd never been elected governor if it hadn't been for Doug Bailey. He also did something else that I never saw anyone else do, no other political consultant. He actually wrote a plan, and we actually followed it during the campaign. But the important thing for me to say today was that political consulting was not the end of Doug Bailey's help. He came to Nashville once a week during my first term as governor, not so much to talk about politics, but about how to be a better governor, which was his idea of how to be a political success. Our conversations were usually not about how to follow, but how to lead, how to deal with the political implications, for example, of wanting to have 3 big road programs and do it on a pay-as-you-go basis so we could attract the auto industry to our state without running up debt, and to persuade all the Republican members to vote for 3 gas tax increases, which every single one of them did. Doug's advice was that a good tactic was to do the right thing because it will confuse your opponents. They won't understand what you're up to. And his advice about recruiting people to work in the cabinet, for example, was don't just invite someone who might take the job. Make a list of the 4 or 5 best persons to do the job, and then ask the best one. You might be surprised. That person might be waiting for an opportunity to serve in public. That was some of the best advice I ever got, because some of the best persons were waiting for the right opportunity for public service. All this sounds hopelessly naive in a time, especially today, when there's so much cynicism about politics. But that's the way it was then, and that's the way I was trained, and that's the way I tried to do my job. I would wake up every day literally thinking about almost nothing else other than how I could help our state move ahead. I called Doug Bailey throughout the last 30 or 35 years whenever I needed good advice. I called him when the Democrats swore me in early to remove a corrupt governor who was selling pardons for cash in Tennessee, and he gave me a few words that I used to speak to the public on that day. One of the best pieces of advice he gave me when the first President Bush called me, when I was the University of Tennessee president, President Bush asked, I knew that he was going to ask me to be the new education secretary. I had about 2 hours to think about it. Doug said, ask these 2 questions. 1, Mr. President, may I come up with a plan subject to your approval? And 2, may I then go recruit a team subject to your approval? Well, that may not seem like much, but after I was announced by the President, I walked into the White House personnel office. They tried to tell me who to hire, and I said, I don't have to do that. I already have the President's assurance that I can recruit a team subject to his approval, and I was able to recruit David Kearns, former head of Xerox, and Diane Ravitch, and others who never would have ended up in President Bush's administration, and he was delighted with that, the President was. Doug always had a project. Some of them were zany. Some of them were downright brilliant. One of the most recent was to try to persuade someone to run for president on an independent ticket online. He didn't succeed at that. He was starting another project when I saw him last at a dinner at the end of January in Washington this year. Ironically, Doug Bailey was an expert in the technology, TV ads, and the hotline, which have contributed to today's polarization in politics. But he withdrew from politics after a while and from political consulting because he didn't like what politics had become. He thought that more elected officials needed to understand that there is a difference between campaigning and governing, and that differences should be resolved in the middle rather than entrenched in the fringes or on the extremes. In a tribute, Judy Woodruff wrote about perhaps Doug's greatest passion and his greatest legacy, inspiring youngsters like Chuck Todd, whom he paid almost nothing to work at the hotline, to care about and be involved in America's political system. And I am sure that Chuck and Nora would tell you that Doug considered it even more important and an even nobler calling actually to serve in government, and that he spent most of his life teaching and helping those who were willing to do it. I would never have been elected governor without Doug Bailey's help. More important, whatever success I had as governor and in politics, I'll give Doug most of the credit for. It's been a long time since I regularly checked with him before I made a political move, but when I did, I always felt like the next step was a surer step and a step more likely to be in a direction that served a larger purpose other than my own political existence. I've never known a person who cared more about each person he met and every issue he tackled. So I wanted to come to the floor today and express this tribute to a public life well lived, and to offer my condolences to his wife, Pat, his children Kate and Edward, his brothers, and his